You never expect that a simple act of kindness could change your life forever. But that's exactly what happened to me. It was just another ordinary evening. I was walking home from work, tired, my mind replaying the same routine thoughts: bills, deadlines, and what I'd have for dinner. The streets were busy, the city humming like it always did. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. A man was slumped against the side of a building, half hidden in the shadows. People passed by without a second glance. It's like he was invisible to everyone but me. Something in me just stopped. Maybe it was the way his head hung, or the faint sound of him groaning in pain. I didn't even think. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I rushed over. His face was bruised, his clothes torn. It looked like he'd been attacked, maybe mugged. But there was something else, something I couldn't explain, a strange familiarity in his features. His eyes fluttered open for just a second, locking onto mine, and in that instant, I felt something. I didn't know what it was yet, but I felt it. "Hey man, hang in there," I said, pulling out my phone to call for help. The dispatcher's voice on the other end was calm, but my heart was racing. I stayed by his side, talking to him even though I wasn't sure he could hear me. His breathing was shallow, his grip weak when he tried to grab my arm. But then, I noticed something. Around his neck was a silver chain with a small pendant. Engraved on it was a name: David. My heart skipped a beat. That was my father's name. My name's Daniel. I grew up in a small town, raised by my mom after my dad left when I was just a kid. He was a mystery, a ghost in our family history. Every time I asked about him, my mom would brush it off with vague answers or change the subject. I'd long given up on understanding who he was or why he left. But seeing that name on a stranger's necklace stirred something deep inside me. The paramedics arrived quickly, loading him onto a stretcher. One of them asked if I was family. I almost said no, but the words stuck in my throat. I didn't know why, but I couldn't walk away. "Yeah," I heard myself say. "I'll follow him to the hospital." I wasn't sure what I was doing. This was just some random guy, right? But as I watched the ambulance drive off, that name echoed in my head. David. Coincidences happen, sure, but this didn't feel like one. At the hospital, I sat in the sterile waiting room, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air. Hours passed. I didn't even know his name, but I felt responsible somehow. Eventually, a nurse came out and told me he'd be okay. A concussion, some bruised ribs, but nothing life-threatening. Relief washed over me, but the questions were still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I asked if I could see him. The nurse hesitated but eventually led me down the hall to his room. He was awake now, looking groggy but alert. As I stepped inside, his eyes met mine again. "Hey," I said softly, unsure of how to start. "I'm Daniel. I was the one who found you." He gave me a faint smile. "Thanks, man. I appreciate it." His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual even though my heart was pounding. "Alex," he replied, wincing as he adjusted on the bed. "Alex Miller." Miller. My last name. My stomach tightened. I must have misheard, right? But no, he said Miller. The same as me. I forced a smile, trying to play it cool. "Miller, huh? Funny. That's my last name too." He chuckled weakly. "Small world, huh?" "Yeah. Small world. Or maybe something else entirely." We talked for a bit, nothing too deep. But every word, every detail, made my mind race. He mentioned he'd been in foster care as a kid, adopted when he was about 2. He didn't know much about his birth family, just that his birth father's name was David. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. David Miller. My father's full name. It couldn't be a coincidence. Could it? But before I could ask more, a nurse came in, saying he needed rest. I left the room, but my mind was spinning. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just chance. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew one thing for sure. I had to find out the truth. Have you ever had a moment where you met a stranger and felt like you knew them? What would you do if you found out someone random could be connected to your past? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the rest of this story. You won't believe where it goes next. Sometimes, it's the smallest details that unravel the biggest secrets. I wasn't ready for what I was about to discover. The next morning, I woke up with one thought in my head: Alex Miller. The name echoed in my mind like a song stuck on repeat. I couldn't shake it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just reading too much into a coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. I got dressed quickly and grabbed a coffee from the corner shop, but the caffeine did nothing to calm my nerves. Instead of heading to work, I found myself back at the hospital, my curiosity pulling me like a magnet. When I walked into Alex's room, he looked better, more alert, sitting up in bed with the TV on in the background. He glanced over and smiled when he saw me. "Hey man, you didn't have to come back," he said, his voice stronger today. "I wanted to check on you," I replied, trying to sound casual, but my mind was racing. "You feeling any better?" "Yeah, just sore. But I'll live," he chuckled. We talked for a while, about random stuff, work, the city, the crappy hospital food. But the whole time, I was trying to figure out how to steer the conversation toward the thing that was really eating at me. Finally, I just went for it. "So, you said you were adopted?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Alex nodded. "Yeah. I was pretty young when it happened. Don't remember much about my birth family. Do you know anything about them? Like where they were from or their names?" He shrugged. "Not much. Just that my birth dad's name was David Miller. That's about it. I've thought about looking into it, but I don't know. Felt weird, you know?" My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. David Miller. It wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. I laughed nervously. "Funny, my dad's name is David Miller too." Alex raised an eyebrow, his smile fading a little. "Seriously?" "Yeah. But he left when I was a kid. I don't know much about him either." For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of the coincidence sinking in. It was like the air in the room had changed, heavier somehow. "That's kinda crazy," Alex finally said, his voice quieter now. "Yeah," I replied, my throat dry. "It is." After a while, I left the hospital, but I couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't just some random thing. I needed answers. And there was only one person who could give them to me, my mom. I drove to her house, rehearsing in my head what I was going to say. But when she opened the door, all those rehearsed words vanished. "Daniel! This is a surprise," she said, smiling. But her smile faded when she saw the look on my face. "Is everything okay? Can we talk?" I asked, stepping inside. We sat in the living room, and I didn't waste any time. "Mom, what happened to Dad?" She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Why are you asking about him all of a sudden?" "I met someone," I said, watching her closely. "His name is Alex Miller. He was adopted when he was a baby. His birth father's name was David Miller." Her face went pale. She looked away, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. That was all the confirmation I needed. "Mom, is there something you're not telling me?" For a long moment, she didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, she sighed. "Your father, he wasn't the man you think he was," she said quietly. "Before we met, he had another child. He never told me about it until after you were born. And even then, he barely talked about it. I think he felt guilty." My stomach twisted. "So, Alex, he's my brother?" She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I should have told you. But after your father left, I wanted to move on. I didn't think this would ever come back into our lives." I leaned back, trying to process everything. I had a brother I never knew existed, and I'd met him by pure chance. Later that night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone. I needed to tell Alex. But how do you tell someone that the guy who found them bleeding on the street is actually their brother? I finally typed out a message. "Hey man, there's something I need to talk to you about. You free tomorrow?" His reply came quickly. "Yeah, sure. What's up?" "It's kind of a long story. I'll explain when I see you." I put my phone down, my heart pounding. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next day felt like it moved in slow motion. Every tick of the clock sounded louder than usual, each second dragging me closer to a conversation I wasn't sure I was ready to have. I replayed everything in my head: meeting Alex on that street, the necklace with David engraved on it, my mom's confession. But nothing could prepare me for what it would feel like to actually tell Alex the truth. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop near the hospital. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at a corner table, staring out the window. He looked better, no more hospital gown, just a simple hoodie and jeans, but there was still a tiredness in his eyes, like the weight of life hadn't quite let up. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Hey man," he replied with a smile. "What's up? You sounded pretty serious in your text." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Yeah, there's something I need to tell you. And it's big." He raised an eyebrow, setting his coffee down. "Alright, you're kind of freaking me out here. What is it?" I hesitated, searching for the right words, but there weren't any. So I just said it. I think we're brothers." For a moment, he just stared at me, like he was trying to figure out if I was joking. Then he laughed, shaking his head. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" I nodded. "Yeah. Look, I know it sounds insane, but hear me out. Your birth dad's name is David Miller, right?" He frowned, the humor fading from his face. "Yeah. Well, that's my dad's name too. And when I told my mom about you, she admitted that my dad had another kid before I was born. She didn't know much, but it matches up, Alex. The name, the timing, everything." He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. I could see him processing it, trying to piece it all together just like I had. "This is, wow. I don't even know what to say," he muttered. "I know it's a lot," I said softly. "But there's one way we can be sure. A DNA test. It's the only way to know for certain." He was quiet for a long time, staring at his coffee like it held all the answers. Finally, he looked up at me. "Yeah. Let's do it." We found a testing center nearby and set an appointment for the next day. The process was quick, just a cheek swab and some paperwork, but the waiting was the hardest part. For the next few days, my mind was a mess. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt, thinking it might be the results. I'd lie awake at night, wondering what it would mean if it were true. I had a brother. A whole person out there who shared my blood, my history, even if we'd lived completely separate lives. Alex and I kept in touch while we waited, texting back and forth. It was weird. Despite the circumstances, it felt natural, like we'd known each other longer than just a few days. We joked about random stuff, shared stories about growing up, and the more we talked, the more I felt that deep connection. Even if the test came back negative, I knew we'd always have this bond. But deep down, I was sure. I didn't need a piece of paper to tell me. A week later, I got the call. I was at work when my phone buzzed, and when I saw the number, my hands started to shake. I stepped outside, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I answered, my voice barely steady. "Hi, this is the testing center calling with your DNA results. Is now a good time to go over them?" I swallowed hard. Yeah, it is." The woman on the other end of the line had a calm, professional voice, but her next words hit me like a freight train. "The test shows a 99.9% match. You and Alex Miller are biological siblings." For a second, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. "Thank you," I managed to say before hanging up. I stared at my phone, the words echoing in my head. Biological siblings. I didn't even realize I was smiling until my coworker asked if I was okay. I just nodded, barely able to contain the flood of emotions crashing over me. I met Alex later that evening at the same coffee shop. When I walked in, he was already there, but this time, he wasn't looking out the window. He was looking right at me, like he knew exactly what I was about to say. I slid into the seat across from him, my heart racing. "Well?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, my face breaking into a grin. "We're brothers." For a moment, he just stared at me, like he needed to hear it again to believe it. Then, a slow smile spread across his face, and he let out a breathless laugh. "Holy crap," he whispered, shaking his head. "I can't believe it." "Me neither," I chuckled. "But it's real." We sat there for a while, letting it sink in. Two strangers, brought together by chance, only to find out we'd been connected all along. "I always wondered if I had family out there," Alex said quietly. "I just never thought I'd find them like this." "Yeah," I replied, my voice soft. "Me neither. Finding the truth is one thing. Living with it is something else entirely." For a while, everything felt surreal. I had a brother. Not just some distant relative or long-lost cousin, an actual brother. And the craziest part? I met him because I happened to be in the right place at the right time. Or maybe, the wrong place at the right time. Depends on how you look at it. But after the initial shock wore off, reality started to set in. What did it even mean to suddenly have a brother? How do you make up for years you didn't even know you missed? Alex and I started spending more time together, trying to figure that out. We'd meet for coffee, grab dinner, and share stories from our completely different lives. It was strange how easy it felt, like we were just picking up where we left off, except we never had a beginning. But the more we talked, the more I realized how much we both lost. One night, we sat on the rooftop of my apartment building, staring out at the city lights. It was one of those clear nights where the stars managed to break through the city's glow, just enough to remind you they're still up there. Alex took a sip of his beer, his eyes distant. "You ever think about him?" I didn't have to ask who him was. I knew. "All the time," I admitted. "But it's weird. I don't really remember him. Just bits and pieces. Like shadows in the back of my mind." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "I never even got that. I don't remember anything about him. Just that name." He glanced at me, his eyes dark. "Do you ever wonder why he left?" That was the question I'd been asking myself for as long as I could remember. Why did he leave? And now, the question had doubled. Not just why did he leave me, but why did he leave us both? "I used to think it was something I did," I said quietly. "Like maybe I wasn't enough. But now, I don't know. Maybe he just wasn't the kind of guy who could stick around." Alex didn't say anything for a while. Then he sighed. "I want to find him." I turned to look at him, surprised. "You do?" "Yeah," he said firmly. "I need to know why. I need to hear it from him." "I mean, don't you?" I hadn't let myself think about that. Finding Alex was already a huge, unexpected chapter in my life. But finding him? The man who walked away from both of us. That was a whole other story. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Alex was right. We deserved answers. Over the next few weeks, we started digging. Old records, online searches, anything we could get our hands on. It was like piecing together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. My mom didn't have much information, just an old photo and a last known address that turned out to be a dead end. But we didn't give up. The search gave us a purpose, something to focus on beyond just the shock of finding each other. But it also brought out some emotions I wasn't ready for. Anger. Frustration. Even fear. What if we found him and he didn't want anything to do with us? What if the answers we got were worse than the questions we'd been carrying all these years? But for Alex, it wasn't just about finding our dad. It was about reclaiming something he'd never had. One evening, after another long day of hitting dead ends, we ended up back at my place. We were both exhausted, sprawled out on the couch, half laughing at how bad we were at being detectives. "Man, maybe he's off the grid," Alex joked. "Living in some cabin in the woods, no phone, no nothing." I laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Or maybe he just doesn't want to be found." The room went quiet after that. We both knew that was a real possibility. Alex finally broke the silence. "Even if we never find him, I'm glad I found you." I looked over at him, and for a second, I felt this strange mix of gratitude and sadness. "Yeah, me too." And I meant it. But just when we were starting to accept that we might never get the answers we wanted, something unexpected happened. One day, Alex called me, his voice tight with excitement. "Dude, you're not gonna believe this," he said. "I found something." When Alex called, I could hear it in his voice. Something had shifted. After weeks of searching, hitting dead ends, and wondering if our father even wanted to be found, Alex had discovered something. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it. I met him at our usual spot, the coffee shop where this whole journey had started. The moment I walked in, I could see the energy buzzing off him. He waved me over, barely able to sit still. "I found him," he blurted out before I could even sit down. I froze. "Wait, what?" "I found him. Our dad." For a moment, the world around me went quiet. The noise of the cafe faded, and all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. "How?" I finally managed to ask. "Remember that old photo your mom gave you? I uploaded it to one of those online search tools, like facial recognition stuff. It hit on a match. He's in Nevada, living in some small town outside Reno." Reno. It felt so random, but at the same time, it made sense. Far enough to disappear, close enough to still feel real. "What do we do now?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Alex looked me dead in the eyes. "We go see him." A few days later, we were on the road. The drive to Nevada was long, giving us plenty of time to overthink everything. What were we going to say? What if he slammed the door in our faces? What if he had a whole new family and wanted nothing to do with us? But no matter how many what-ifs we threw out, one thing was clear: we needed to do this. The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. We found his address easily, a modest house on the outskirts, with an old truck parked in the driveway and a mailbox leaning slightly to one side. We sat in the car for a while, staring at the house, either of us moving. "This is it," Alex finally said, his voice low. "Yeah," I replied, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "This is it." For a moment, I thought about starting the car and driving away. But then Alex opened the door, and I knew there was no turning back. We walked up to the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. When we finally stood on the porch, Alex looked at me. "You ready?" he asked. "Not even a little," I admitted. He gave a nervous laugh, then raised his hand and knocked. The sound echoed in the quiet neighborhood, and for a moment, nothing happened. But then we heard footsteps, and the door creaked open. There he was. Our father. He looked older than I expected, gray hair, lines etched deep into his face. But his eyes were unmistakable. They were my eyes. Alex's eyes. He stared at us, confusion flickering across his face. "Can I help you?" For a second, either of us spoke. We just stood there, two strangers on his doorstep, holding the weight of years he probably wanted to forget. Finally, Alex found his voice. "We're your sons." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. For a moment, I thought he might laugh, or slam the door, or tell us we had the wrong guy. But instead, he just stared. Like he was looking at ghosts from a past he thought was buried. After what felt like forever, he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," he said quietly. We followed him into the house, the air tense and thick with unspoken words. The living room was simple, old furniture, family photos on the wall, but none of us. We sat down, and for a while, no one said anything. The silence was deafening. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I never thought I'd see either of you again," he said, his voice rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. "Why?" The words slipped out before I could stop it. It wasn't just curiosity, it was years of anger, confusion, and hurt bundled into one syllable. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was young. Stupid. I made mistakes I didn't know how to fix. When your mom got pregnant with you," he said, looking at me, "I thought I could do better. I thought I could be the man I wasn't before. But I wasn't strong enough. I walked away because I didn't know how to stay. It wasn't the answer I wanted. I wanted a reason, an excuse, something that would make it all make sense. But all I got was the truth. And the truth wasn't clean or satisfying. It was messy and painful." Alex spoke next, his voice quieter. "You left me before I even had a chance to know you." Our dad's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw something real: regret. "I know. And I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life." We talked for hours after that. About the past, the years we lost, the people we became without him. It wasn't easy, and it didn't fix everything. But it was a start. When we finally left, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. We stood by the car, neither of us ready to leave just yet. "Well," Alex said, breaking the silence, "that was a lot." "Yeah," I agreed, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "But I'm glad we did it." Alex nodded. "Me too." We climbed into the car, and as I started the engine, I realized something. This wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning. Over the next few months, Alex and I kept building our relationship. We didn't always have the right words, and we didn't always know what we were doing. But we were figuring it out, one day, one conversation, one shared memory at a time. As for our dad, that's still a work in progress. Some wounds take longer to heal. But now, at least, we have the chance to try. Because sometimes, family isn't about the people who raised you. It's about the people you find along the way. The ones who stay when they don't have to, the ones who show up when it matters most. And for me and Alex, we found each other when we least expected it. And that's the best kind of family there is. Have you ever reconnected with someone from your past or discovered a family member you never knew about? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how your journey unfolded. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You never know when the next chapter of your own life might surprise you.